the radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome. Welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Thursday night, August, summer 2021. As we revert back to lockdowns, and I hope you've all got your vaccination cards and your vaccine passports. At least in Puerto Rico, they're not going to allow you into your place of work. They're not going to allow you into restaurants. We were just told that contractors are now, in order to come to onto a job, are going to have to be able to show their vaccination card. So the slow fascist takeover is accelerating in every aspect of our lives. We now have to prove to the state that we have done what they told us to do, that we are following the orders. They can't mandate the vaccines. They know that will not stand, I think, the Supreme Court. So they are mandating that businesses require you to have the vaccine. So it's just, which is, you know, half of the way or 3/4 of the way they've taken over this country, or they control our lives, is not by direct control. They mandate the businesses do it for them. So,
in the other half of the country, state governments are prohibiting businesses from requiring vaccinations or masks.
Yeah, which
and
is
that, I think, is a hell of a lot worse, because at least there is some scientific justification for not infecting other people. Certainly, nobody has a right to infect other people with a contagious disease, and a private business owner who wishes to impose a mask requirement or a vaccine requirement has every right to do so. But in those states in which private business owners are prohibited from taking those minimal precautions, that's one hell of a lot worse.
Well, it is, but I don't think it is, because people are going to get vaccines who don't need vaccines. People are going to get third boosts of vaccines that don't need third boosts of vaccines. And once you let the government answer the question of whether I should get vaccinated or not, when I'm not a carrier, I don't have the virus. There's no end to the control. So I think both are evil and wrong. Both are motivated by different forms of, state motivated to get involved in our lives. It's just unbelievable to me that we've gotten to a state where this is just, everybody just accepts this, and this is standard practice.
Well, what's unbelievable to me is that I am 75 years old with asthma and cancer, and my asthma doctor has prescribed a third shot of Moderna for me.
And you can't get it.
No pharmacist is allowed to fill that prescription. Yep. They face draconian punishments for acting according to my health.
Yep.
And the fact that the right is doing this,
well, that's not the right.
Encouraging, yes, they are, because they are the ones who are putting in mandates not to vaccinate, not to put on masks.
Sure, but the issue of a third dose is a different issue. And it's an issue of the FDA approval, right? In Israel, they're doing third doses, and everybody's criticizing them because the FDA hasn't approved a third dose yet. And the FDA hasn't approved the vaccine. It's still on emergency use. The FDA should have approved these vaccines months and months ago and taken them off of emergency use. I mean, it's ridiculous. But I agree with you about the right. I agree it's ridiculous that Florida is required. So cruise ships leaving Florida have put in restrictions that if you come on the cruise, you have to be vaccinated. And the state of Florida is banning them from doing that, restricting their ability to do that. It is complete insanity. And of course, Florida right now, not exactly a place where you want to be if you're susceptible to this virus, because it's crazy right now, the situation and the debate that's going on. Adam, we agree that, that the right is at least as bad as the left, if not worse than the left on these kind of issues. It's just pathetic.
But I think this is merely the first step in what Leonard Peikoff describes in the dim hypothesis, namely, the next wave of authoritarianism is going to come from religion, from mysticism, and is going to be therefore anti-science, and therefore against technology. We see it in the opposition to social media technology. Yep. We see it in opposition to biological technology.
I agree with you. I've been arguing for years that the authoritarianism will come from the right, not from the left. And I think that you're seeing their anti-science, anti-technology attitude right now. But again, I find myself in a weird position of defending the left. I'm always of defending the right, attacking the left as much as the right. But it's, the anti-science this is why I think you're going to get authoritarianism. The anti-science is everywhere. The anti-science is on the left. We know that with the environmentalism, and we know that even with COVID, they're not using science. It's politicized on the left. The right is anti-science and has been for a long time, across the board, and now is both sides, but particularly the right is anti-technology. What will unite the left and the right, which is how we get authoritarianism, is, I've always said, religion, environmentalism, and I think lumped up with that is an anti-science, anti-quote experts and elitism that will unify the authoritarians around I think a charismatic leader who comes from the right. Has to be a patriot.
Yeah, let me just add that on the left, the Marxism, including critical race theory, is just Christian self-sacrifice in secular paint.
Sure.
And they have absolutely no trouble in alliances with the anti-science right. We've seen this in Venezuela, and we think of the government of Venezuela as being left, but it is at least as much a theocracy as it is a leftist dictatorship. If you look at all the propaganda coming out of Venezuela, more than half of it is theocratic, demanding self-sacrifice in the name of Christianity.
Sure, and they're leveraging the fact that their population is dominantly religious, and they're using religion to achieve their means. And since America is so dominantly religious, I think authoritarians of the future will have to use religion if they're going to dominate this country. And I think Leonard's absolutely right in my hypothesis that is going to happen. All right, let us move on, just because there's a lot of questions. And I have two of your questions also lined up here, Adam.
Great.
But let's go. Let's start with Nick, and then I know you guys are asking a lot of super chat questions there. Let me know the $20 ones are going to get priority, and I don't, we'll see how long we go today, but we've got a lot of people on phone and a lot of super chatters, so we'll see how we integrate this all. Go ahead, Nick.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. By the way, are we going to do this? I signed up for that $75 capitalism.
Yeah, it's on a week from Saturday. You'll get an email today, tomorrow. You should get an email with more information about it, but it is happening.
Are we going to have a homework, or you said something about homework or some kind of a preparation before we come in?
If I said you're going to have a homework, you'll have. I don't know. We'll get you. Yes, there is going to be prep. There is going to be additional content. So
Okay.
it will go out next week.
Are we going to move in that direction? Have in terms of having more? Is there interest? I know I signed up immediately.
It's a question of how much interest there's going to be as we do these. I'm looking to offer a variety of different products so we can diversify kind of the revenue mix. But if there's interest in this one, and there's reason to believe that people sign up for other ones as well, then we'll do more of these. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point that the interactive shows are the way to go in terms of where the user can ask follow-up questions.
Yep.
So that's just my little 2 cents worth. All
I
right,
mean,
let me ask.
The challenge with that is that fewer people watch them, and so it's added. It's something I have to add. It can't replace kind of the normal shows because otherwise all those monthly supporters will disappear.
Well, what happens if you get money up front? Like you're getting money up front in terms of you got to come up with the right number, right?
Yeah, it's just a question. It's just a question of coming up with the right number. But then, supply and demand. You raise the price, you lower the demand. So that's just life. Right?
Well, yeah, it could be. All right, now this is the question I want to ask. Is on the wealth process. If we were to come up with a flow chart in terms of how wealth is created, now we know what a leftist flow chart would look like. It's all muscle in terms of how wealth is created, and you throw some money into it, and they got the simplistic version of how wealth is created. Now, if we were to come up with how wealth is created, we would starting point would be an idea by an entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. Perhaps then capital has to be raised.
Yep.
To see that into fruition. So what other aspects is there? And the other thing I want to follow up, is there any books that you've read that describe the components, if we were to put it in terms of the major components of how wealth is created? Someone who understands.
I don't know if there's a book out there that has that, but I would say it has to start with a particular type of idea. That right. It has to be not a scientific idea, not a aesthetic idea. It has to be a particular type of idea. So, and Matt Ridley calls it an innovation, or it has to be an innovation. It has to be something that, in a sense, takes scientific ideas, engineering ideas, other ideas, and applies them to a business context. It has to be around the creation of wealth. The idea is how to create wealth, how to create value. That another way of saying wealth is value, right? How do I create value? So it's a particular type of idea, and then the question is how do you? And then it's the bringing together of the resources necessary to make that idea a reality. The most important among those resources are the entrepreneur, the manager, call him the CEO, the capitalist, and ultimately the workers. You need workers, right? Or the robots or whatever. But you need an innovation. You need managerial skill. You need capital, and then you need people to actually, people to or the machinery to actually create the value. Those are the steps. And then, of course, you need to be able to make that value a reality, which is not simple, right? A lot of entrepreneurs have ideas, but they can't make them a reality, either because they can't put the team together, they can't create it, or they've created it, but they can't market it. So marketing is not a non-trivial part of the process of wealth creation. You have to let the world know that you've created something of value for them. This is the genius to a large extent of Steve Jobs. It's not just having an idea and executing on it. It's then being able to announce it to the world in creative ways that people realize that what exists here is a value, and only then is wealth created. Wealth created doesn't exist if you create it. If you create the better mousetrap and nobody comes, you haven't created any wealth. People have to come. People have to discover your better mousetrap, and that's the genius of marketing.
You've just described 5 components. Then the idea itself, the capital to see that idea into fruition, the management needed to implement that plan, the workers that go along with that, and the 5th component would be the marketing.
Yep.
So if you had to do a flow chart, that would be it.
I think so. I mean, there's a lot of components to management would include kind of accounting and everything associated with that. But I do think marketing is a unique, it needs to be separated out because it's something that's always looked down upon. It's always, oh, those marketers, what do they know? But good marketers who have the technical skill, let's say if it's a tech company, to be able to identify the value that the technology represents and convince the public of that value, that's hugely necessary for wealth creation.
Yeah, there's various aspects to marketing, the branding, the getting it out, the product, the social media part. It's multifaceted.
And Steve Jobs was a genius at that. I mean, he was a genius at a lot of things, but certainly he was at that. And very few entrepreneurs are good at it.
Right. Okay, excellent.
All right, Daniel.
Did you see my question? I sent you a little note from The Economist that started off. I can I can hit the headlines if you don't have it in front of you.
I don't have it in front of me, so
no worries. So this is the editor-in-chief of The Economist, and she's noting that Chinese regulators have mounted over 50 actions against scores of firms for a dizzying array of alleged offenses, from antitrust abuses to data violations, costing investors around $1 trillion. And then she goes on and says, but what China's doing echoes many of the concerns that motivates regulators and politicians in the West, that digital markets tend towards monopolies, that tech firms hoard data, abuse suppliers, exploit workers, and undermine public morality. You know, I'm aghast. I agree with her. She's right. The motivation and the goals of regulators East and West are the same, but
well, I'm not sure they're the same in the East. That is China. It's not obvious that the motivation in China is the same as in the West. The West, they buy into, let's be benevolent towards the regulators in the West. They buy into some notion of perfect competition, some notion of, we care about investors. We want to make sure that there's no fraud. There's some pretense of market-based reasons, even though they're false, for what they do. I mean, I think in the East, at least some of it, in China, at least some of it is just a pure power grab. That is, what's his name? Jack Ma, who's this genius entrepreneur, got too big for his britches, right? And needed, it's what American politicians wish they could do, right? They, Trump just was itching to go after Jeff Bezos and knock him down like Xi has knocked down Jack Ma. So it's much more naked in terms of the power play that's involved, and the fact that this is about penalizing and getting rid of people who have upset the Communist Party and the people in charge. Now, on top of that, yes, they have learned from the U.S. They have learned that we regulate everything, and people still think of us as a free country, and we're worse than Europeans in terms of regulations. We regulate many more things than the Europeans do, this is true again of right and left. We take the precautionary principle pretty seriously in certain fields, so that we don't even start up stuff because it's too risky. The Chinese have much more appetite for risk than we do right now. They're, for example, are building nuclear power plants in China and experimenting with new technologies around nuclear power plants that in the West you couldn't do. Certainly in the US you couldn't do. I think Scandinavia, they're doing nuclear power plants. So they've learned from us that supposedly organized regular markets and financial markets require massive regulations. That's what they're learning from us. And they're learning the pieces of statism that we have. They're not learning anything about liberty or freedom. And the world is less and less and less likely to want to emulate the United States around anything, given the performance of the mixed economy.
And here the editor-in-chief says, Communist Party's deeper ambition is to redesign the industry so as to sharpen its country's technological edge while boosting competition and benefiting consumers. I mean, that sounds like a playbook from the West right
Absolutely.
there. You know,
yes, but I think that's a disguise, that's a way to rationalize some of what is with them, as it is in the West.
Yeah.
It's just a power grab, right? In the West, it's also usually a power grab, right? It's not like Dodd-Frank really cared about the stability of the banking system. Right. It was a power grab by the feds, and as is, but in China, it's more naked. In China, it's more, explicit in a sense.
And my question at the end was, it seems to me that the morality of sacrificing entrepreneurs to the incompetent has been around for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. Why is it so much more successful today than it was in the past? Why are they able to do more, get more traction with this kind of?
Well, but is it? I mean, we're not burning any of entrepreneurs at the stake. We're not, we're not shutting. We're not, doing pogroms because we want to white out the debts. We're dealing with it in a quote civilized way.
But the British didn't take over the regulate the loom, right?
But that's you're talking about the history of the last 250 years. So yes, in the last 250 years, we got an increase in respect for individual production, individual success, and then a slow decline in that. And we're part of that slow decline right now. Right. But it's the Enlightenment that created the increase.
Okay.
And as the Enlightenment fades up, but before the Enlightenment, we were much more brutal than we are today. You couldn't start a business without getting permission from the king. And right. Even then, or you got monopoly power from the king. And even then he owned half of it or whatever. And right. He really technically owned all the land. And you see, there was no concept of private property. There was no concept of anything like that. So no, in many respects, we're in much better shape than we were back then. But it is true that there was a period post-Enlightenment that we were much, much better. And that has to do with the ideas of the Enlightenment that liberated people to admire wealth, liberated individuals to believe that they could become wealthy, liberated markets, and it was all new and it was exciting for people. Now we take it for granted.
Yeah.
And we take the wealth for granted. And if somebody has a lot of it, we go, well, anybody could have gotten that. Why did he grab so much of it? Let's redistribute it.
Yeah.
Right? So it's
yeah, and you see a lot better traction, I think you've said, in like Eastern Europe, where you give talks where college-age students, they're really, fired up about these kind of ideas, and college students in the US are kind of like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, because we're rich, we're spoiled, we take it for granted. We have no idea where the wealth comes from. Particularly young people never worked, they don't know. And none of our intellectual leaders teach us that or talk about it. It's just a void. And in the East, at least, they're poor, so they know what it takes. Whatever they have, they know how hard it is to gain, and maybe they remember the evils of collectivism. At least some of them, and somewhat.
Right. Thank you.
Sure. Right, Deborah. Oh, she objected, Deborah.
Yeah, it just depends on which
I know
how I log on. You can call me whatever you want. So you've inspired me to reread The Cave in the Light. I've been enjoying revisiting that book. I've also found I'm getting more out of it the second time.
Yep.
I think that's because it's really dense material, and I've also probably learned and matured since I read the last time, which was a few years ago. But I was wondering if you've heard of a book called The Clockwork Universe. It's got a similar theme. It's much more narrow, but I love it. I've read it like 3 times. It's
Okay.
so good. It's like a history of the Royal Society and how people transitioned in the like sort of the Western mind transitioned from this steeped in mysticism to culminating in Newton, you know, the development of the Royal Society and then culminating in Newton. So I thought I'd offer that to you in return for inspiring me to read Clockwork Universe. It starts with
universe.
It's really good. It starts with Galileo, goes all the way through Newton. It's about that sort of, it's much more narrow than Cave in the Light, but it's about that transition that I know you've said before you're really interested in, how people kind of emerge from that M2 mentality.
I read these novels that deal with the Royal Society. They kind of fictional but history based. Newton plays a significant role in the novels. He was at least according to the novels, he was a pretty weird character in addition to a shattering genius, but he was pretty strange. It was like an 8-book series of novels all about that period in the late 17th century, early 18th century around the Royal Society, the conflict between Newton and Leibniz. It was actually, I enjoyed it. I'm not going to say it was great literature, but I enjoyed it.
This is the Baroque cycle.
The Baroque cycle,
that you referred to?
Yeah.
I got that on my list.
Yeah.
But this is a real account, and I do think there were a lot of weird characters back then. People like just were weird. They had these strange conflicting beliefs about, I mean, they were applying the scientific method to some theory about like what happens with, I can't remember, something to do with unicorn, like the powder from the horn of a unicorn has some effect. And then like the Royal Society, some people tested that and they applied the scientific method to it. So it's this really interesting illustration of this clash between this rampant, just totally irrational mysticism. And then against that, here comes this new methodology of thinking, and away goes the mysticism.
And what's so scary and disappointing is that while in a sense the Royal Society won and reason won, it only won for a period, and the mysticism didn't go away, and it snuck back in, and now we're descending back into that craziness, we're just insanity of mysticism and disrespect for science, and it's Plato.
It's hard to understand.
Even the light. Plato never dies. As much as you try to kill him, he never dies, and he keeps coming back in different forms and in different ways. And he, Aristotle just has not killed him yet, and now it's Ayn Rand's job to kill him finally. But we will see. We'll see how long it takes.
I wonder what you think this. So this will be my question. What you think about? I think it's really, really hard to function without some kind of framework. I mean, Ayn Rand talks about that in Philosophy Who Needs It, and probably in a lot of other places. I think it's just so hard to function without some kind of framework. You got to have something. You can't just live with chaos. And at least when they're young, people have to just go by what they're told. I mean, to some extent, you can't just start out from scratch and figure everything out. And having gone through the process myself of abandoning this dogmatic framework, it was not easy. I mean, it was excruciating, actually, and it took many, many years. And I think a lot of it's just the effort. Maybe people just don't see the point in going through all that effort when there's all this stuff just laid out in front of them already. Like, here's how you do things, and these are the rules, and these are what you should believe. And it takes so much work that I wonder if, I don't know how to break out of that either.
No,
but I think that's got a lot.
Plato has a certain hold on people, that the mysticism, the idealism in the negative sense, in the Platonic sense of this world out there, the afterlife, the emotionalism, the appeal to emotion is very, it's very intuitive. It's very easy. It's very, as you said, it's lazy. Anything else requires effort. And we're asking them, no, reject all that and embrace facts and reality and reason and think for yourself. Think. And it's like, whoa, it's too hard. So it has to come in stages. It doesn't happen all at once on a culture-wide. This is, Leonard always used to say, the culture is now ready for objectivism. And I was like, that sounds weird. What does it mean for culture to be ready? Well, it means that people have to be oriented towards reality, like in the Royal Society. They have to recognize the scientific method, even though they haven't given up on unicorns. They have to identify. So they haven't gone all the way, but at least they've got a path. And the culture has to go through and has to do more of that, and it's disappointing because we're post-Enlightenment. It's disappointing because the Royal Society has been in existence for so long, and you think they won already, but they hadn't. They made a dent. They made a good effort, as the British would say, good jolly effort, but they didn't quite make it. They haven't, and they needed Ayn Rand, and now, but she needs a lot of help because she needs people in the culture who are scientists, who are educators, who are from and this is the dim hypothesis again, who are in the different fields, who can show the world how this integrates, who can execute on it, who can move the culture step by step towards that. And for that, you need artists, and you need scientists, and you need educators, and you need philosophers. You need the whole gamut of things in order to get this. So that's what we need to do. But it is hard because it requires effort. Anything that requires effort is gonna be a challenge for people. And
especially with
we're fighting a culture that doesn't value that kind of effort. It values different kinds of efforts. And but this is the sense. I mean, what you're saying about you've got to have a system of thought is absolutely right. And this goes back to the point we made with Adam. And that is why I think the right is more of a threat than the left. The left has no system. It's got a hodgepodge of disintegrated, nonsensical stupidities that don't even rise to the level of a system. So they've got critical race theory and environmentalism, where they literally want to shut down everything and for all of us to die. It's just not something people are going to embrace as a system. And they have no personal morality. The whole view of personal morality is do whatever the hell you want, nobody cares, right? So they don't provide guidance. They don't provide, whereas the right, because of religion, has a system. And the system might incorporate certain elements from the left because it'll be convenient for the right to do so in order to ultimately dominate. But it's a system. It's theocracy is more appealing in that sense because it gives you personal guidance. It teaches you how to live, supposedly. It's why Leonard said that you have to have a misintegration in terms of the final, kind of takeover of authoritarianism. It has to be a misintegration, not a disintegration. But yes, our job is so hard because we have to get them to integrate, and then we have to get them to integrate around the right concept. And that's work. Yeah. And they have to do the work. Like religion tells them, you don't have to do the work. Here's the book. We're going to tell you, here's the preacher. You don't even have to read the book. Nobody reads the Bible. You just have to listen to this preacher. He'll tell you what the book says, right? It is disappointing that we're where we are today.
Well, I have a thought on that. DIM is applied to business. I'm going to save that for my next question, though.
Okay, sounds good. All right. Is this Andrew 734, area code 734?
No, this is Jennifer.
Oh, hi, Jennifer. Okay. Hi. I'm used to Andrew being the one on the phone and you being on video, but.
Oh.
That's right.
First of all, I want to say, did you see Amy Peikoff on Neil Oliver's show on Saturday?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, she was on there talking about the internet and censorship and things like that.
Yeah. Okay.
So my question though is, as far as the vaccines go, like you were just discussing people on the right and how they're religious and all that. Now, the media keeps saying that Republicans are taking the vaccine less than Democrats because the Democratic government, Biden is telling them to do it, and so they're just rebelling against that. But even Trump told them to take it, and plenty of Republican governors are telling them to take it. So I think it's because, like you guys were just talking, because of the mysticism and religion of the right. They think God will save them or something.
I definitely think at the root it's a kind of anti-science mysticism. It's kind of funny that now it used to be that the left used to say, oh, the FDA is too loose. We need a stricter FDA. They're they're allowing drugs to, the Atlantic had an article recently about how we need to do away, this is from the left, how we need to do away with emergency authorization. We need to get an FDA to be much more restrictive, much tighter. And it used to be the left's argument, but with COVID, now it's the right's argument. I keep hearing from the right, I don't trust the vaccines. They didn't go through all the tests that the FDA requires. It's like, wait a minute, you're supposed to be free market. You're supposed to be skeptical of FDA requirements. You're supposed to be pro-business. And you're seeing the right be anti-corporation, anti-pharmaceuticals. By the way, that was they got from Trump. But I think it's the mysticism, but I think it's more than that. I think it has been politicized. And it's not that certain Republicans have advocated for vaccines, although, fewer and fewer Republicans are advocating for vaccines because they know where their voters are, and their voters are anti-vaccine. So, but it's in the grassroots, among the grassroots Republicans, the idea is that the vaccines are a democratic way of, taking over the country, imposing their will. And they think that, politicians who tell them to take the vaccines are sold out. The Republicans are sold out. And, QAnon has told them not to take the vaccines. So, they've come to the conclusion that this is a status threat, or all kinds of excuses that are basically grounded in, for mysticism, but motivated by politics, motivated by them versus us. Everything is now them versus us. Everything now is tribal, and everything is in the name of tribalism. And they won't take the vaccine because Democrats take the vaccines, is because experts are telling them to take the vaccines. And, that's the other thing that dominates the right now, is this anti-experts, right? That's pretty, who are you going to get your information from if not from experts, non-experts? So it's all about politics. And this is what happens when you get the government dominating everything, and you get a government that is involved in everything. And you get a president like Trump, who clearly politicized the whole response to COVID. I mean, yes, he was at some point anti-lockdowns, but so it's anti-lockdowns associated with right. But people forget he, in the beginning, in March, was pro-lockdowns. He actually accused de Blasio of locking down too slowly, locking down New York too slowly. He went back and forth on everything. He went after Georgia at some point for opening up too quickly. And then he flipped and accused everybody else of not opening up too much. So the whole COVID phenomena is being politicized and taken out of the realm of science and into the realm of subjective points of view motivated by politics.
Yeah, that's too bad. Okay, thank you.
It's tragic, yep. All right, let's see. We have a bunch of Super Chat questions, some asked by email, some asked. So let's do. Robert says, you've mentioned the opportunity for Ayn Rand's influence to grow via up-and-coming presenters leveraging the newest self-help trends. Any more thoughts on what they will look like and possible pitfalls to watch out for? I mean, the pitfall is superficiality. The pitfall is not knowing your stuff, right? So not knowing your objectivism and not knowing how to apply it properly, objectively. And the key word here is objectively, not subjectively, objectively, to the issue of self-help. So that is a huge, that's, I think the biggest pitfall is that people come out with, claiming to be objectivists or with a superficial understanding of objectivist, and it's rah, be happy, hear the virtues, and the virtues become dogma rather than chewing the virtues and a real guide to life. I think, what does it look like? I don't know. If I knew, maybe I would do it. Ideally, what it would look like is real professionals, people who really know psychology or really know philosophy and its application, properly applying the objectivist principles to human psychology, human betterment, human development, human achievement, and coming out with courses, self-help courses, self-help books that utilize objectivism, but integrated with scientific first-handed knowledge in the field of let's say, psychology, or let's say, or business, or whatever the self-help is centered around. So it does not come across as dogma, dry, boring, meaningless, but it's integrated into a real body of new knowledge around what does human happiness require, right? So that's, I think, what it would look like. And, think about why, one of the reasons Jordan Peterson is so successful is that he's good at doing that. Now, I disagree with a lot of what he does. I disagree with the science. I disagree with a lot of his conclusions, but he's very good at taking cutting edge stuff from evolutionary psychology or from his psychotherapy practice, using concretes in the world out there, his scientific knowledge, and his particular philosophical approach to all of this, integrating it all into something that is self-help for people, that actually conveys, I know what I'm talking about. It's based on real evidence. It's based on my practice of as a psychiatrist, and yet it's applicable to your life. And I think it's very powerful what he does. It's wrong, and it's too easy in a sense that he doesn't challenge the most fundamental beliefs, but it's still wrong. All right. It's still successful because it appeals to people. Okay, we'll take these 3 more questions, and then I've got some written ones. Brad, thank you. Really appreciate that. That's very generous. We're at about $150, guys. Ali is here. $400 is the goal. I've actually, because we're a little behind this month, I've actually raised the goal to $600. Ali doesn't even know that. So now she's really depressed. So help her out here, and let's see if we can get to $600. From now on, for the rest of the month, $600 is the goal, so we can get our average. Let's see. Michael asks, do you think a significant number of objectivists accept the philosophy rationalistically? Rand's ideas have only changed their politics, but their psychology is still screwy. It doesn't become real to them. Yeah, I mean, that's not a issue of opinion. That's just an issue of fact. Almost all young objectivists, I might even say all young objectivists, are rationalist. I don't know how you avoid it. Ayn Rand gives you on a silver platter a systematic philosophy that is super complicated, super hard to come up with, and yet she gives you all the integration. She's done all the induction for you. It's all just there. And you read it, and it all makes sense, and you get it, and you're convinced, right? That was me at 16. But what do you know? You're ignorant. You don't have any concretes to justify this. You haven't done the work to concretize it. You certainly haven't done the work to induce it. You've got years in front of you to actually figure this out and actually work through it and actually read everything and get to the and live, most importantly, actually have some life experiences that actually you can use to induce these principles that you not take for granted as given, as true, right? And in the interim, while you're doing that, you're going to be rationalistic in the sense that you're going to hold most of the philosophy as a floating abstraction, untied to real reality. It'll seem real to you. You'll be adamant that it's real to you. But it just won't be because you haven't done the work. And as you learn more, read more, study more about history, about science, about politics, you learn more about yourself. You just experience human interaction. Suddenly you start filling up all those empty, file folders that in your brain that had these concepts. And slowly, if you do the work, and this is where the work comes in, and Debbie is right, it's work to keep filling it in and to keep integrating and making sure it's all consistent and all works and you still agree with it. That takes a lot more time. And a lot of effort. Now, it's true, some people are more rationalistic than others. Usually, it's a question of how the smarter you are, the more rationalistic you tend to be, from my experience, because you're much more comfortable in the world of abstractions without tying it to reality. That's part of what quote smart means, right? In terms of just sheer brain power, IQ. It's also a function of how much life experience you have. Some people have more life experience at 16 than others. And it depends when you study the ideas. If you get to them at age 30 or 40, you're less likely to be rationalistic than if you got to them at age 16 or 20, right? It's true of everybody, right? I mean, Leonard will talk about how rationalistic he was. Harry Binswanger will talk about how rationalistic he was. Ayn Rand wasn't, but that's because Ayn Rand was the genius, the supreme genius here. So it's very common and to be expected, and it just takes time to knock it out of yourself. Nobody can knock it out of you for you. You have to do it for yourself. And it manifests itself with some people in politics, but not only. Sometimes there's a variety of different ways in which rationalism manifests itself, not just politically. Joshua says, I have a friend who lives in fantasy land, video games, social media, living beyond his means, and doesn't always work hard. Is it okay for me to withhold celebration when good luck comes his way? Am I a moral embezzler? What does that mean? Why are you a moral embezzler? I don't get the moral embezzler part. But yeah, absolutely, it's okay with you to withhold celebration when it's just good luck and you know that he's undermining himself. There's nothing really to celebrate. Celebration is for achievement. Achievement requires effort. Achievement requires dessert. And if he doesn't really deserve it, what are you celebrating? So I think it's absolutely okay to withhold that celebration. Oh, Siri, shut up. All right. Sorry, my Apple Watch decided I was talking to it. Is there a science to establish and maintain an institution? How can someone specialize in organizing human capital in order to increase efficient knowledge transfers between generations of people? Yeah, I mean, there certainly is. I mean, this is the science of management, and there is a lot of literature about succession and maintaining knowledge and how to transfer from generation to generation within an organization. I don't necessarily have any recommendations for you, but the knowledge, the science does exist out there. It's taught in business schools, but there are a lot of popular books out there. I don't have, my memory doesn't work in a way that I can just, I know there's a book I'd like to recommend to you, but my mind doesn't work in a way that it just delivers that recommendation just to you. All the other sentences come, but not the names of books and the names of authors and the names of movies and things like that. But there is, look for the top management books out there, particularly written maybe 30, 40 years ago. I fear that too many of them today are written from a woke, politically correct, nonsensical perspective. But look for stuff that was written in the past. But there's a real science of management that, I mean, it might still be relatively young, but there is such a science. Here's a quick one. Hi, Yaron. Did you watch the Olympics? What was your favorite sport? I was completely disgusted by the way the IOC treated Taiwan. What are your thoughts on the IOC? The IOC is one of the most corrupt organizations on the planet. I mean, God, I mean, some of the stuff they do is just so obviously ridiculous. It's second only in pure corruption, I think, to the World Federation of Football, soccer, right? Soccer is like, do you know where the next World Cup is next year, actually? It's in Qatar. In the summer. They're going to play soccer when it's 44 degrees outside. In the blistering heat. Now, supposedly Qatar has built these, not to mention the way Qatar treats women, not to mention the way Qatar just treats human beings, not to mention the fact that it's a equivalent of monarchy. Put all that aside, just the heat. Why would anybody choose to put the World Cup finals in Qatar? Because they got paid off. I mean, it's fraud. So OAC, the Olympic Committee, I think, is very similar. But the way it treats Taiwan, the way the whole world treats Taiwan, the way the World Health Organization treats Taiwan, put that aside. The way the United States of America treats Taiwan. We don't have an embassy there. We have a library. We don't even have a consulate. We have a library that serves as the equivalent of, we have like an American library in Taiwan. And of course, they didn't compete as Taiwan. They competed under the name of the capital city. I forget the name of the capital city. The name of the capital city in Taiwan. Just disgusting. I did watch the Olympics. I try to watch every year. I probably every 4 years. I probably watch less this year than usual, partially because of the renovation in our house. So we don't really yet have a dedicated TV place, partially because I was traveling. But I did spend quite a bit of time with my parents in Israel. And it was nice to watch the Olympics with them. Historically, I like to watch the women's gymnastics. Taipei is the capital. So they competed under Taipei because you're not allowed to compete under Taiwan. Just horrific, just disgusting. But the disgust should be not with the Olympic Committee. It should be with the United States of America because they're just following our lead. We are the enemy. I know the patriots among you won't like this, but we are the enemy. I'm going to leave my rant about Afghanistan for I don't know if you've seen. Okay, so I have to say something. I don't know if you've seen now the headlines. The United States is sending 3,000 troops in to evacuate the embassy. So you remember the Hanoi helicopters with people clinging on? Same thing is happening here because they're afraid the Taliban was going to take Kabul anywhere between 2 weeks to 90 days, right? We have a peace treaty. Trump administration got a peace treaty with the Taliban. What happened? We are basically negotiating with the Taliban right now. As we're evacuating, we're negotiating with the Taliban right now, saying, look, behave yourselves. Don't go after our embassy. Please, please, please don't go after our embassy. And if you don't go after embassy, after you take power, violently oppress your own people, murder thousands and thousands and thousands of people, we'll give you foreign aid. I mean, literally, this is what they're doing. They're negotiating foreign aid for the future when the Taliban takes over, just so they won't attack our embassy. This is the United States of America, the leader of the free world, the the shining city on a hill, whatever you want to call it. God, what a disgrace. What a disgrace. And in foreign policy, we've been like this since Vietnam, but it just doesn't stop from shocking me how absurd and ridiculous all this is. Anyway, that's Taiwan Olympics. I enjoy the women's gymnastics. I was disappointed that something Bales, she withdrew because she is fun to watch. She's an amazing athlete. And she's at the peak form because she just won the world championship, doing exercises, doing things that nobody has ever done before. So that would have been fun to watch at the Olympics. I was disappointed I didn't get to see her compete. I enjoy the swimming, although it seems boring. I was a swimmer, so I kind of enjoy the swimming. I enjoy the track and field. What else do I enjoy watching? I don't get things like judo. It makes no sense to me. It seems completely nonsensical. As I don't get a lot of sports that they've introduced. I think it's bizarre that they're doing mixed races, men and women competing together. I think that's just politically correct nonsense. I don't like wrestling and judo. Basketball, Olympic, who cares? I mean, the NBA is basketball. Everything else is amateur time. And even the NBA players are, playing with one hand tied behind their back. I'm sure there are other sports that I like. Oh, beach volleyball. I didn't see any beach volleyball this time, but in past Olympics, I really enjoyed watching. And I always imagine myself playing. That seems like a fun sport to play. That would be something I'd enjoy doing. So that's another thing I like, is finding these sports that I can imagine. I wouldn't do it today because I'd go for one of those, I'd die for one of those shots and never get up again. But, 20, 30 years ago, that would have been a sport for me. I can see myself diving for balls and that would be just a blast. There's got to be there's a bunch of other things. You can't do dodgeball in the Olympics. I mean, that's absurd. It's not a sport. Not a sport worthy of the Olympics. Track and field, swimming, gymnastics, some diving, although that I hate, I wouldn't want to do it. So I always am worried about that. Anyway, that's, I do love that. I love to see excellence. And these people are so good at what they do. I mean, they're so good at what they do. And it's one of the only places anymore in life, sports, one of the only places in life where you're allowed to celebrate excellence, and the whole world celebrates excellence and everybody cheers excellence. And it's just such a treat to not just do it yourself, but to know other people are, and to know that excellence is being rewarded, whereas in other places it wasn't. And Israeli actually won the men's floor exercise, which is like, but then, all these Jews become Israelis so they can compete in the Olympics. But he won gold. So, and the woman won the artistic thing with the ribbons and bows. I've never watched that, but an Israeli woman won that. So go figure, Israel's competing in the Olympics and winning medals. Never thought I'd see that day. All right, Brad, thank you. That's a very generous question. So I have to take it. Your comment about young objectivists being rationalists has been stuck in my mind since you said it. It helped me a lot. Thanks again. Good. I mean, I'm saying it not to offend anybody. I'm saying it to help you. If you're young, just everything you think just question and be patient and look for concretizations, look for ways to prove it to yourself. Look for examples in reality. Ayn Rand, in order for Leonard Peikoff to cure his rationalism, used to send him on walks. She'd take this abstract concept we're trying to understand, and she would say, go find it on Fifth Avenue. Go find this abstraction on Fifth Avenue. So in a sense, go see it. Go find examples of it. Go concretize it for yourself. And if Ayn Rand could do that to Leonard Peikoff, all of us should be doing it, right? Because all of us probably need it. So, all right, let's see. All right, let's do one of Adam's, and then we'll do the loop. So Adam, I'm going to shorten this. So Adam is in the past, and Adam's not the only one, but other people have recommended this amazing Korean show, Daejang Jem Guam, DAEJANGGEUM. It's a particularly romantic TV series out of South Korea. And given that the other romantic shows out of South Korea, this one is is supposed to be right up there, if not, maybe the best of them. What happened with this TV show is that there was some objectionable content in it for the Chinese and the Malays and the Indonesians and the Philippines, maybe, but primarily I think the Chinese. The Chinese are the 800-pound gorilla here. And China put a lot of pressure on the South Koreans to basically censor, if you will, this show. So they didn't outright censor it, but what they did instead is cut out all the sections that were not, and issue it as the DVDs. Instead of 18, 10. The 18 is still kind of available, particularly if you know Adam. He has them all on a drive, and I have a copy of them, which I haven't watched yet, but it's on my plan for the next 6 months. But so the question really boils down to, given that this was government force, that that this was government kind of imposed, that you can't find this anywhere, you can't find the full show anyway, and that the shortened version is worthless because it takes out all the good parts, it takes out all the romanticism. Would it be justified to spread the, in a sense, you could argue, pirated copy, but the original copy, without the creators getting the benefit of it? And I would say yes. At this point, absolutely. The show is, it's a travesty what has been done. It's a travesty that we all fold to pressure from the Chinese government. It's a travesty that not only have they managed to censor it for the Chinese, they censor it for us because they've basically pulled it out off of all the services that would normally present such shows like Netflix or Prime or whatever like that. It's not there. It used to be on a Korean app, but that's gone as well, I think, because of some of this pressure. So yeah, I don't see any problem. This is one of those mixed economy kind of thing where I don't see any problem putting them up there. I mean, be ready for some nasty emails from some authorities to come in and having to pull it off, but I would say go for it. All right, let's go to Nick.
Am I on?
Yes, you're on.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to talk about what do you think you've learned from the recent debates you did in terms of tactics? I guess I'd be referring to the two most recent, the Sam Cedar and the Vosh debates. It seems like they used two strategies in terms of trying to get you into minutia, of a topic, and then straw manning you to death, or they cite all these these studies about the poor and all that from these echo journals, and they just do a paper dump. I mean, what are you supposed to do? Counter it with a paper dump of your own? I mean, you can't get into these. There's, like you said, there's so many of them. So what I'm saying is, in terms of the Sam Cedar strategy, it seems like, yes, given the constraints, it's an hour debate. I mean, you can get into the minutia and try to fully explain something, knowing you're going to get straw manned. Wouldn't it be better to pivot and say, listen, if you want more about the topic, go onto my website. I describe, for example, critical race theory, what it is, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? So there's got to be better strategies to use given the time constraints.
The challenge is that if what you're trying to convince are the better innocent listeners to the show, right? You're not trying to convince the host. You're not debating the host in a sense. And the challenge is there that you don't want to come across as evasive. You don't want to come across as, well, he doesn't really want to answer the question right now. So ideally what you want to be able to do, and depending on the particular topic, this is easier or harder to do. You want to indicate what your answer is. You want to indicate what your objection is. You want to indicate that the actual situation is not as the other side is presenting it, right? And then you can say, I talk about this on this article and this book or whatever, right? But you've got to give them some indication. Otherwise, you come across as evasive. The real challenges, I think, is to find a way to broaden it and to go to the principle. That is to address their concrete, because you have to. You can't leave it as statism is practical. But hey, it's not moral. What can we do, right? You have to go with morality, practicalities out. You have to indicate that it's not practical. So you have to combat their assertions about practicality. And then you have to pivot to a moral or more principled, more broader point. You know, what I tried to do with Sam Seder, I don't think I was very successful at it. But what I tried to do with Sam Seder, both on the opioids and on the apartment building collapse, is pivot to the in a sense personal responsibility, to the idea that individuals should be able to make decisions for themselves, and the individuals should be held responsible for the decisions that they make, not everybody else, right? We shouldn't be held responsible. You know, we shouldn't be held responsible for the decisions other people make. I mean, and it was partially successful, partially not, because he kept drawing it back into, was there an issue here, personal responsibility? And the facts, I think, align with me, but it's hard to convince that that's indeed the case. But you've always got to go to a broader point you are trying to make. And it can't just be, I don't know, egoism is good. You know, it has to be, you know, people are responsible for their own decision-making, and therefore, and they are moral agents, and therefore they should suffer or benefit from the consequence of their actions. That's a much more a science concept, science principle that they can chew, that they can get, right? And that was what I was trying to do with both those examples, but that both are complicated examples, and that's where you get into trouble with time. But you see the seed, hopefully, and you know, I think the Sam Seder debate was somewhat less successful in a sense that it attracted fewer people just based on subscriptions. The Vosh debate was more successful, maybe because it was longer and it was more contentious. I think if I had more time with Sam, it could have been, and I was the time constraint, not him. I had to run to a meeting. But if we had had more time, I think I would have been able to get to more people. You can't always win these debates.
Yeah, but you learn from him. But what I'm saying, would you do another debate with Sam?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Perhaps we can initiate something with him and do
Absolutely.
a follow-up.
Yeah, give him some time, but we can go back to some of those points. Absolutely.
No, I mean, he gave you respect. He did say we had a civil debate, and he was very respectful. So
yeah, I mean, they strawman you afterwards when you're not there anymore.
yeah, but now you know their tactics, so you beat them to the punch.
Address the strawmanning. They'll always strawman you. There's no way to deal with strawmans, right? You know, but I don't care that they strawman me, right? Because anybody honest can see it. The video's up, and anybody dishonest, what difference does it make? Right. All right, Daniel.
All right. Well, speaking of straw men, this time it's capitalism. Article in MIT Tech Review. Capitalism is in crisis. To save it, we need to rethink economic growth. And they describe how there's a degrowth movement. And they say, at the core of the degrowth movement is a critique of capitalism itself. In Less is More, How Degrowth Will Save the World, Jason Hickel writes, capitalism is fundamentally dependent on growth. It is, he says, not growth for any particular purpose, mind you, but growth for its own sake. Now, having set up this straw man, there is a economist at the Harvard Business School, Rebecca Henderson, who says, you can churn out all of the GDP you want, but if suicide rates go up and the depression rates go up and the rate of children dying before they're 4 goes up, it's not the kind of society you want to build. We need to stop relying totally on GDP, she says. It should be more than just one metric among others. Part of the problem, she suggests, is a failure to imagine that capitalism can be done differently, that it can operate without toasting the planet. In her perspective, the US needs to start measuring and valuing growth according to its impact on climate change and access to essential services like healthcare. And my question is really, yeah, where to start? Isn't economic growth, at the end of the day, a measure of freedom, protection of individual rights, and individuals who have ambition are creating the growth? I mean, isn't that where
Well,
growth
I mean,
comes
I
from?
don't know. There are a lot of countries that grow very fast that don't have, I mean, they might have more protection of individual rights than they did before, but they have less than, let's say, the United States, which is growing very slowly. It's a measure of material well-being. And she says, we need to care about healthcare. Almost a day foot. Where the hell does she think healthcare comes from? Poor people don't have healthcare. Poor countries don't have healthcare because they're poor, not because they don't care, because they're poor. So, and how are we going to get better healthcare? How are we going to live to be 150, 200, 250? Because of wealth creation. So it's sickening. And the people who suffer the most from it are the poor. Let's say you earn $40,000 a year today. That is, I don't know, that's below the median. It probably puts you lower middle class, maybe at the close to poverty line, right? We could take a lower number. It doesn't really matter. And let's say the economy grows at 2% a year, right? For the next 50 years. 2% a year for the next 50 years. How much will you be earning if your salary approaches GDP? How much will you be earning in 50 years? Well, 40 times 1.02 to the power of 50, and that turns out to be $108,000. Now let's assume that 2% is real growth, not inflation, real growth. So you are now making $100,000 a year. $100,000 a year is not bad. It's a pretty good salary. You can live pretty well. How many poor people around today would love to make $100,000?
All of them.
And I'm not talking about all the other benefits that come from 2% growth. Now, forget 2% growth. Imagine we had 4% real growth, not adjusted for inflation. That 40,000 is going to be worth over $280,000. So 2% growth is worth $100,000. 4% growth is worth 3 times that, almost $280,000. Now, $280,000 is not just a good salary. It's a really good salary. Now, we're talking about people who make $40,000 a year today. I'm not talking about people who make $100,000 a year and therefore would make $700,000. Or people who make $250,000 a year and make 7 times that. I mean, the number of people who would be millionaires, gazillionaires, is astounding. All we need is the pretty modest requirement is 4% real growth for the next 50 years. Can you imagine life if the lowest incomes are about $100,000 a year? And average middle-class person, solid middle-class person is making $1 million or close to $1 million a year. I mean, healthcare would be a drop in a bucket. I could buy the most expensive insurance policy in the world for that. And that doesn't take into account, that's just GDP growth. That doesn't take into account what's called consumer surplus, all the benefits we get from increased wealth, right? All the changes in lifestyle that we get from increased wealth. So what these people are doing is they are killing us. They're killing our ability to live great lives where, money becomes a non-issue, where we can have anything we want pretty much. At that point, we'll want things that maybe cost a lot more, like flying to Mars or something. But it's just, just run the numbers. Just look at what exponential growth does, what compounding does, right? If the United States had grown 1% less over the last 100 years, we'd be poorer than Mexico. Do these people want to be poorer than Mexico? So these are people who relish, relish poverty. These are the what do you call it? What was the name? Mother Teresa of economics, who just love the idea of poverty. The meek shall inherit the earth. They don't want to see people successful. They don't want to see people happy. They don't want to see people achieve their values. It truly is. I mean, I can't think of people who sicken me more than the anti-growth people, because they're basically destroying our lives.
Well, claiming that capitalism is all at fault here. It's causing.
Well, and they at least recognize that capitalism produces growth. Give them credit for that, right? But they're saying, so Marx recognized that capitalism produces growth, and Marx thought growth was good. These people don't recognize capitalism produces growth, and think growth is bad. And in that sense, it's too nice to call them Marxists. They're way beneath Marxists. They're the grossest type of human beings who want to go backwards. And yes, capitalism, but she mentioned suicide. I was just reading an article the other day that during COVID, suicide rates actually went down significantly. Globally, not just in the United States, global phenomena. Suicide rates went down. So if suicide's the standard, we should just lock everybody down. People don't commit suicide, it turns out, when they're in lockdown. Even though depression went up, suicide went down, which is an interesting phenomenon. You could speculate as to why. I think it's because people don't commit suicide if there are other people around them. Partially because they know how badly the people around them will take the suicide. So they care enough about somebody not to commit suicide. Maybe not about themselves, but about people around them. But it's
I think it's an important point that this is an economist at the Harvard Business School, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this isn't just a nut on the street.
No, exactly. That's what makes it sickening. It's not some even hippie environmentalist nut. It's a Harvard Business School professor. Growth is overrated. It's a vicious, evil idea.
Thank you.
Debbie.
Still reeling from that, and not just anywhere in Harvard, like the philosophy department, where I would expect something like that, but the business school. Isn't business supposed to be pro-growth? I mean, what are you doing with your business if you're not trying to grow it?
It's supposed to be a sustainable business, and in perfect competition, of course, there's no profit. So you just run the business for, I don't know, your platonic enjoyment. And sustain it. So for every tree you chop down, you plant two. For every carbon emission, you plant more trees. You do a lot of tree planting, I think. I don't know.
Yeah, the business is there to serve the stakeholders, right, Yaron?
Yes, it's all in the service of stakeholders.
Yeah. A note on the rationalists, objectivists. I was definitely the worst of most obnoxious, dogmatic rationalist objectivist when I first found it. So definitely not a dig. I don't know if that would be avoidable for anyone. It definitely wasn't for me.
I mean, you can be more obnoxious. You can be more obnoxious or less obnoxious, but we're all rationalists. Now we're definitely obnoxious. I was definitely on the obnoxious side, at least for a while. I think I overcame the obnoxiousness when I realized that there were people who knew more than me. But it took years for me to see that, because I thought for a while I was the only objectivist on the planet. I didn't even know Ayn Rand was alive. So I was very isolated. So I until I met people who actually knew more than me, I didn't realize how little I knew.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a lot of hope, because I know there's a lot of people out there who are in that rationalist phase. They're on their way to not being in that phase anymore.
Hopefully. I know some who never got over it, but yes, it takes work to get over it.
Yeah, it takes work, exactly. So speaking of business and growth, I wanted to. I've been thinking about the DIM as applied to business. I know Leonard Peikoff, who definitely knows more than me, especially about this, said that DIM, it doesn't really apply to business. Like you wouldn't look at business. It's not really relevant from that standpoint. And I think what he meant was about the product of businesses, like that someone makes an iPhone, that's not like a DIM applicable thing, like what product comes out into the market. But how businesses operate, the actual way that people interact with one another and conduct business, I've been stewing on this. There's an author called Cal Newport who I really like and admire. I don't know if you've read any of his things, but he recently came out with he writes a lot about the value of focus and deep work. Okay. And he recently came out with a book called A World Without Email. It's not literally advocating for abolishing email, but the whole point was that there's this phenomenon he calls the hyperactive hive mind, that is a mode of operation that exists in businesses and organizations today. And I definitely am feeling the pain of that in my organization. And it's this immediate term mentality of like, oh, I have an issue that's just come up. And so I'm going to fire off an email and schedule a meeting and copy a bunch of people on it. And why did that just come up? Well, because you didn't think, you didn't plan ahead. And, like there's no structure around how processes are organized and no long-term planning. And I fight for that all the time in my organization. I work in technical program management in operations. And it's like everything falls off a cliff after this fiscal year. It's like we got nothing planned for 2022. For my particular program, we're planning out to 2025. But everybody else, just like when something comes up, they just fly right in and they say, oh, we got to deal with this now.
Yep.
And it's an emergency. Who could have possibly foreseen this? Well, you could have. But anyway, my point is that without starting to rant, because I'm going to start to get frustrated and angry, and I've been thinking, like, what is this? This is like a D thing, and I thought, and this is Dewey, because, for example, there's a resentment of people who do time blocking. Like if you put time, you have to schedule time in your calendar that you're going to be doing work, because if you don't, someone will schedule a meeting.
Yep.
And there's actually a resentment that happens, like, I think you're time blocking, like you're getting away with something. I'm stealing some of my time from other people. Like, and I keep, the more I think about it, the more I think this is Dewey. We don't think until something comes up, a situation that we have to deal with, and then we're put into a state of dis-ease, and we have to freak out and do a fire drill and fix it. And don't you dare try to go by yourself and think, it's just like Dewey in the workplace. So I think first of all, that really sucks that we have to deal with that in business, but also that there's a lot of opportunity there because people feel that pain. They don't understand it, they don't understand where it comes from, but people are writing even books like this Cal Newport author created. And within organizations, there's so much more opportunity for efficient execution and, higher profitability and efficiency, and just generally a better life experience on a day-to-day basis for all the people who work there. So I wonder if there's a really good opportunity there to instill a better mode of integration, a more rational framework of thinking about things in the long term and integrating in that business context. So what do you think?
I think that's absolutely right. I think though what Leonard means is that first of all, I don't think in business you can have an M2 or D2, right? So you can deviate from I only so much because reality will slap you back if you deviate too far, right? So business is connected to reality in a way that politics doesn't have to be, and philosophy certainly isn't. And because you start losing money if you completely disintegrate it, you're not going to survive. And if you misintegrate over a wrong idea, you're not going to survive. So the variation, while so substantial from the perspective of somebody in the business, is big. It's not that big. It's all within, generally, there has to be some integration, otherwise the business will fall apart. So I think that's one, but there's no question that you could take this idea of integration and apply it to everything, apply it to every field. It's a requirement of human epistemology, requirement of human knowledge, requirement of human success, and the creation of anything. So certainly, you're going to need to be able to integrate in a business and be able to integrate well in a business in order to be successful. So there does seem to be, there's an opportunity there to do a business book on integration in business and what that would mean and what that would look like. I think really good businesses, particularly early on and when they're smaller, do it implicitly. Otherwise, they wouldn't be successful as they are. But yes, bureaucracy tends to set in, and bureaucracy tends to disintegrate.
Yeah, it shows up. I mean, you can go pretty far into the D1 in my experience with business. I'm living with it. I know you can't go all the way, but and if you want to see what M looks like in business, I proposed Theranos. Yeah. I worked there for 5 years.
Oh, you did?
And I think that's as close as you can get to the M. Yeah.
Wow. That's an M2,
I've got a lot of.
That's a real M2.
Yeah. It definitely wasn't aligned with reality. That's for sure.
Yep. Turns out. Huh.
Mm-hmm.
Did people internally suspect?
It was so locked down internally that, like, the engineers, of which I was one, were physically barred from entering the area where the scientists work, and vice versa. There was no communication. Nobody knew what was going on. And I would keep saying, like, hey, I know this is to protect our intellectual property, but aren't we more likely to have intellectual property worth protecting if we're allowed to, like, the scientists that are developing the assays and the engineers that are making the instrument are allowed to talk to each other?
Yep.
Maybe we'd be more successful that way. And I'd say that to one of the VPs, and he'd say, yeah, I agree, but Elizabeth's not going to go for that. Yeah. But so there was a lot of dysfunction that was growing, and it was, she always had a story. She was such a smooth talker, and really initially I admired her so much when I first started working there because I thought she was real. And so it took me a while to get to the point where I start, like, something's not right here. And then, so people, depending on what position they were in, more or less were suspecting of what was going on.
Yep.
But,
All right, great. Yes, I think there is work there to be done. It's a good field. All right, let me just thank Leonard for a generous contribution. Jeff, thank you. Corey, thank you. Let's see some questions. All right. You once said something along the lines of housing should be considered a product we consume rather than an asset we invest in. How do you respond to the common statement that homeownership is a key element, some people say essential, of building intergenerational wealth within families or communities, and that homeownership is a significant contributor to social mobility? Are these statements completely tied up in the way we've distorted the housing market in order to incentivize homeownership and strong-arming economics to make them appear true? Yeah, I mean, I think it's completely a feature of the fact that we restrict supply. I mean, if you owned a home in Ohio, as a friend of mine has in the past, and couldn't sell it for 20 years, where's the intergenerational wealth building? Where's the contributor to social mobility or anything like that? It is true, though, that the fact that we constrict the supply in certain parts of the country, like California, does cause the value of homes to go up. It is also true that buying a home and having a mortgage is, for many people, the best or only or most convenient, least effort requiring form of saving. So what you get is that people save by paying off their mortgage, right? They build equity in their home. Now, I don't want to pay off my mortgage. I'm against paying off your mortgage, for me, right? Because my mortgage is money somebody's giving me that I owe them 3.5% on. I can make 3.5% in the market. I can do better than that. So the bank is basically giving me money to invest, so to make more money than that. But most people don't do that, and most people can't maybe do that, and most people don't save. So what happens is their mortgage payment lands up being their only savings, and in that sense, it serves as intergenerational wealth, and it serves to build up a certain amount of wealth and equity. But imagine that they rented, and all the money they didn't spend on housing, and maintenance, and the increase, the interest that they pay, and all of that, they actually saved. I'm not sure they wouldn't be better off. Now, it depends on the particular rental market in a particular state. Again, all that is distorted by housing regulations and constraints. You know, I just read today a story about, you know, the real outcome of this ban on evictions, what it's going to be? It's going to be that a bunch of people, because they've been forced to hold all these properties for so long with not earning any income on them, what that's going to do is going to force them to sell the homes. Those homes are going to sell. Plus, the real estate market's gone up because of inflation and because of constraints of supply. They're going to make money by selling the apartments. The number of rental units is going to shrink, and you're going to get more homeless people in the streets. Not because of them being evicted, but because they're being evicted to sell. It's not like other rental property is becoming available at the same time. So you're going to see fewer and fewer, just overall, fewer and fewer rental properties available in the United States. So government distorts these markets horrifically. And much of this is a consequence of that. But again, the saving part of it is important. Low-income people tend not to save money, but they tend to pay off their mortgages. And think about paying off your mortgage as a form of saving because you're building up principal. It's an expensive form of saving, by the way, because you're paying interest. When you were first learning objectivism as a teenager and in your early 20s, what was the hardest thing for you to accept? What were the major sticking points between you, what you knew and believed before, and what you were seeing in Rand's writing? Later, when you're formally studying objectivism, what was the hardest thing for you to understand and be able to explain at the level Dr. Peikoff and your other instructors expected of you? I mean, as a teenager, it's easy. I mean, a teenager, I found the most difficult part was the egoism, was the idea of living for self. I mean, it went against everything I was brought up on, everything I was taught to believe, the culture, my parents, schooling, society, everything. And as a consequence of that, it was hard for me to give up on the collectivism, on the kind of Jewish nationalism, Jewish collectivism. That was the hardest for me to give up on, and hardest for me to accept. I got it intellectually, but emotionally, it was very difficult for me to let go. It took a long time. From the perspective of studying objectivism at a higher level, God, there's so much. I mean, you just open up any one of Ayn Rand's essays, and there's so much that's hard about what she's saying, hard to understand. Try to rewrite it in your own words, or try to explain it to somebody. The deep points she's making, not the superficial points she's making. It's very hard. So, I mean, I did 2 confusion papers for Leonard. He had a confusion papers class where you wrote about issues you were confused about in objectivism. And the 2 papers were, one was on capitalism. It's from the Ayn Rand's essay, What is Capitalism?, which is one of the hardest essays I've ever read. And I still read it over and over again to try to understand it all. I once tried to teach it, and it was a complete bomb, a complete disaster, because it's almost impossible to put Ayn Rand's words into your own, because her words are so well chosen. And so you have to have a completely different outline. You can't just crib her outline and not crib her words. And then you're just reading the essay to somebody. So, but that essay, the whole issue of metaphysical value judgments, versus socially objective value judgments. Not metaphysical. Socially objective value judgments versus philosophically objective, something like that. Anyway, yes, I think philosophically objective value judgment. So values. That was a hard one for me to grasp, and I did a confusion paper for Leonard on that. And then the other one I did was on art. Why the hell should I read Tolstoy? Right? He's evil. The literature is evil. What's the value of reading philosophically horrible art? And he turned into a lecture, which you can get. I don't think he mentions me by name, that I was the source of the lecture, but it was my confusion. There was a lot of the material Leonard did in those years in the 90s for lectures came out of the confusion papers that we wrote as a class for him. All right. But there are a lot of issues that were hard. The whole epistemology is hard. The integration of it all, seeing the connections is hard. I still read Opa and I'm in awe of kind of the connections and the formulations, and I can't hold that even to this day completely. All right, Michael asks, AI intellectuals are very impressive. Their talks are well presented. I'm very surprised you're the only one who really puts himself out there with lectures and traveling and podcasts. We need to ramp up production. Well, it's not production we need to ramp up. We need to ramp up exposure and marketing and stuff like that. I think they produce a lot. It's that they don't produce it necessarily in a form that's easily consumable to a lot of people. It's also true that you don't see a lot of their production. That is, most of their production is at the OAC, at the Objectivist Academic Center, teaching the future intellectuals. That's the real added value that they provide, because that's what's going to guarantee that we don't just have 5 of me in the future, but we have 100 people like me or 1,000 people like me out there in the future. But don't forget there's Alex Epstein. I mean, Alex was trained at the Institute. Don't forget there's Don Watkins. Don't forget there are others out there, Jonathan Honing and others. There's a whole project that Ayn Rand Center UK is doing with a variety of different intellectuals. Harry now has his own YouTube show it'll ramp up. You'll see more of them in the public sphere. They are doing the important work of training the future intellectuals. All right, look, guys, we are at $340. We should at least get to 400. Although, remember, the goal is 600, and we are an hour and 40 minutes into this. So somebody step up. All right. And if you ask a $20 question now, I'll jump the queue and you get to go first. Michael asks, I don't think anyone is lazy. So-called laziness is really just fear of failure. I don't think that's true, because I think laziness precedes laziness in the fundamental sense. That is the unwillingness to focus, the unwillingness to engage, the unwillingness to think. It's not a fear of failure. It's not wanting to do the work. And I think that's what leads to fear of failure, because when you don't do the work, you fail. And that's a vicious cycle. And then you then continue not to do the work because you don't learn the right lessons from the failure. And that shuts you down more and more and more. So I don't think it's fear of failure. Do you think Larry Elder has a shot at becoming governor of California? If he won, would you move back? No and no. I don't think he has a chance of becoming governor of California. I mean, I have a lot of problems with Larry Elder, but he's about as good as you could get. California wouldn't elect him. And would I move back? No. I mean, what is he going to do? Cut taxes? How much? And what's, to cut taxes is to cut spending, because California has a balanced budget amendment in its constitution. What is he going to cut spending? How much? Where? Give me a list of the things he's going to cut. I mean, he'll cut at the margin. California will spend less, no question. How much less? 5%, 10%. I mean, they would have to cut 50 to 60 to 70% for me to move back. Not happening. Michael again, the obedient always think of themselves as virtuous rather than cowardly. Yes, and we've got a lot of obedient people out there these days, obedient to the party line, obedient to whoever they view as the authority. Have you heard Clarence Thomas's remarks on the virtue of selfishness in Ayn Rand? I've heard some of his remarks on Ayn Rand. I don't remember, I vaguely remember maybe hearing something on the virtue of selfishness. But Clarence Thomas is super religious. As much as he loves Ayn Rand, and I know he does, he, for example, has a yearly, an annual event where he has all his clerks watch The Fountainhead with him. They watch it every year. So he's a big Ayn Rand fan. But he's also really religious. And he's got some really bad ideas, I think, legally. I think he's probably one of the better justices out there for most things. But on the things he's bad on, he's bad. But I haven't heard his comments on the virtue of selfishness. I don't know how he would square that positive, how he would square that if they are positive with his Christianity. And his wife is super religious, super Trump supporter, super non-intellectual, very active in the Republican Party. Corey says, actually, I second that rationalism is very easy to slip into. For me, I need to keep grounded, of which shows like these slap you back to reality. Thank you, Corey. Yeah, somebody asked about rationalism in the chat. Look, by rationalism, we don't mean, there is a confusion in the world out there, and if you're not familiar with objectivist jargon, rationalism does not mean being rational. It does not mean the elevation of rationality above all else. Rationalism technically means divorcing your concepts from reality. It means dealings of abstractions divorced from reality. It's being pseudo-rational, because to be rational is to think logically about reality using facts, and to have grounded your concepts in reality, ultimately through the inductive process by seeing. So rationalism, when we're knocking rationalism, we're not knocking rationality. We are advocating for rationality. We're advocating against rationalism, which is floating, divorced from reality. Okay, Corey asks, is the debate with Richard Wolff still on for later this year? Yes, October 12th. October 12th at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. I'll be debating Richard Wolff for, I can't remember what student group is invited this. They're paying me money. I assume they're paying Richard Wolff a bunch of money, although I don't see how it's moral for him to accept it, given his socialist beliefs. So I assume he's contributing all that money to a charity. I am not. I am going to consume all that money. So it's on. It's October 12th. It's a Wednesday in Pennsylvania, at the University of Pennsylvania. Detailed information I will provide you once I have it. All right, Ryan says, I'm reading Opal and thinking about religion. I think that religions should be full supporters of objectivism. Through a free society, religious groups have freedom to be as mystical and irrational as they please. Do you agree? No, because objectivism is not about freedom, primarily. I mean, freedom is just the thing the outcome, the thing that at the end of a long, very complicated chain of philosophical induction, you get to, oh, we should be free. It doesn't start with freedom and go backwards. So objectivism stands, if you're reading Opa, the first, I don't know, I can't remember, 9, 10 chapters have nothing to do with freedom and everything to do with how irrational, immoral, downright evil religion is. Sorry, right? So Opa is not neutral about religion and, hey, we should be free, so you can be free to be religious. No, religious is the enemy, the enemy. And yeah, if you're free, you can be religious. It's your problem. You'll suffer the consequences of it. But religious people hate objectivism because they don't really care about freedom. They want to impose their views on other people. So they don't, at the end of the day, really care about freedom. Not the really religious people. So no, OPA stands in complete and utter repudiation of religion. Everything in it, including the liberty, including the freedom, stands as a repudiation of religion. Because why should you be free? Why should you be free? Why is freedom of value? Because you're rational. If mystical revelation was true, there's no reason to be free. What requires freedom is the rational mind, and your life requires the freedom to think. But if your life doesn't require thinking, you don't need to be free. So everything about objectivism, every aspect of it, including the deepest point in aesthetics, is anti-religion. I can't emphasize that enough. Anti-mysticism. All right, Shazba. Did you see the link I sent for the Nihilist Wine Company? The company statement is something else. I haven't seen it yet. Where did you send it? Oh, I think I saw an email from you, but I haven't had a chance to read it. Maybe it's in that email. I assume it's in that email. But that sounds pretty spooky. A Nihilist Wine Company. Is all the wines corked and sour and yucky tasting? What is it? What does it add up to? All right, let's do one more round quickly with you guys. So let's take Adam's question. The state of Texas has passed legislation enabling a nominal non-governmental mechanism of theocracy. Nominally, private civil law lawsuits by anyone, no connection to reality is required, against alleged providers of an accomplices in abortion. This, in effect, makes it financially impossible to provide abortion services in the state of Texas. This also lowers that bar for evidence from beyond a reasonable doubt that would be required from a government under criminal law to mere preponderance of evidence, and poses an unprecedented constitutional question that, being unprecedented, is open to arbitrary pseudo-reasoning by the current theocratically oriented Supreme Court. Yeah, I mean, I haven't read about this. I need to do a little bit of research about this. But the idea of anybody civilly suing, but who would sue, right? Because the mother, the potential mother, chose to do the abortion. So it's not her that's going to sue. Who's going to sue? Some third party who has no connection. Or I guess the guy who impregnated the girl, or a family member or something, but they're not involved. They're not relevant. So it also is a violation of a basic principle in law, which the Supreme Court seems to usually uphold. That is that you have to have standing in order to sue. And here it sounds like, from what you're saying, Adam, you don't need standing. You just need to oppose abortion. And you so yeah, I mean, the right is so dedicated to destroying abortion that they are constantly finding new ways to attack it, to come at it. They keep changing the legislation. The Supreme Court knocks it down. They come back with a new one. The Supreme Court changes a little bit. They try the old one. You know, they are very nimble, very creative in trying to get their anti-abortion theocratic message across. And I think they're going to be successful. It's just a question of time before Roe versus Wade is struck down as law. And then it'll be up to the states, and women in Texas will have to travel to. I don't know if you saw, did you see this movie? It was actually a pretty courageous movie. Unpregnant. Adam, have you seen the movie Unpregnant?
No, I have not seen the movie, but I am familiar with the precedent of the Texas law in Singapore, where the argument is that a society where people break certain moral commandments of God is going to be made miserable by the God whose commandments are being broken.
Sure.
And so everybody has standing.
But it'll be interesting to see if that holds up in the US courts. I mean, that would be pretty horrific if it does. I get that, but that would be the end, because that would open everything up to everything, right? Because anything that violates God's commandment now anybody can sue about. And that would be just it would be the end of freedom in this country. So I do recommend the movie Unpregnant. It's a bit of a teen movie, so it's you have to take that into account. But it is about a girl who decides she wants to get an abortion, who lives, I think, in Ohio, and nobody will give it to her without getting consent from the parents. And she's under 18. And of course, her parents are fanatical Christians, and she's not. So she has to travel to, it's Missouri. So she has to travel to New Mexico, to a clinic in New Mexico to get the abortion. And the movie's a road trip movie about her traveling to get the abortion in New Mexico and the adventures she has on the way. And it's a fairly entertaining movie. It's not a great movie. It's a fairly entertaining movie, but it shows you the horrors of what would happen if she can afford to go. I mean, she can barely afford to go, but she can afford to go. Imagine what happens to people who can't afford to go out of state to get abortions, and all the trauma that involved with that, and whether states could prosecute you for leaving the state to get an abortion. That could also be possible. It's just horrific. And the way they're going to treat doctors, and they're already treating doctors, the way they're treating doctors as murderers. Okay, Nick.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. I can now. Now we can. You muted yourself. Now I can.
Okay. All right. Now, my question is on the various types of libertarianism on the spectrum, right? Now, on the far spectrum would be the mixture with anarchy, where you get the Rothbard anarcho capitalism.
No such thing, but okay.
So yeah, there's no, well, okay, it's a contradiction, but that would be one obvious one. Now, just for the sake of argument, we would fit on the other spectrum, right? Just on the sake, we're not libertarians, but we're objectivists, right? But if we had to fit on that spectrum, we would be property rights, individual rights, constitutionalists. So we would be on. What are the in-betweens? What are the different flavors? That's what I'm trying to get.
Spectrum. I don't get the spectrum.
No, that's if we were to describe what liberty. Okay, even if we leave ourselves out, what are the different types of libertarianism?
There is no such thing. There is no such thing as libertarianism. That's the problem, right? So they are anarchists, and they're way over there. They're on another world, another spectrum. They're together with the communists and the fascists, in my view, right? Because anarchy is communism and fascism, or the equivalent of, because there's no property rights, there's no individual rights. It's anarchy, which means there's guns in the streets, shooting in the streets, people are killing each other. It's Somalia. It's the worst. It's as bad, if not worse, than communism and fascism. So there's no spectrum from there. That's just hell on earth. And then there are these guys who are a little bit friendly towards free markets, right? They call themselves libertarians, right? There's the von Mises, the von Mises, real von Mises, the Ludwig von Mises, who I don't think called himself a libertarian, but he believes in free markets, property rights, government, protection of individual rights, very, somewhat similar politics than ours, with no philosophical foundation. And then there are ones that think that government should have UBI, universal basic income, and so there are all the different variations of libertarians who want a bit of statism, various levels of statism. But you can't put the anarchists in there with them, because they're not the real anarchists. I'm not talking about people who, like the economists, who can't really figure out why there shouldn't be anarchy, and they rationalistically created this whole structure in their minds. They're not committed anarchists, but the Rothbardians, the real Rothbardians, they're on the side of the real bad guys, because in what they advocate, because anarchy is bloodshed, no less bloodshed than communism and fascism.
Where would you put John Mackey, for example? He calls himself a libertarianism.
Yeah, so he's
part statist.
He's part statist. So Mackey is, if objectivism is over here, and communism, fascism, and anarchy, the collectivists are way over there, then John Mackey is in our direction. He's away from the collectivists, but he's closer to us, yes. But he's better. He's a good, John Mackey fundamentally is a good guy who's very, very confused about things, and obviously very productive and very successful and has good views on a lot of things. But it's many libertarians are there, closer to us, away from collectivism. But I wouldn't put, it's unfortunate that anarchists poison that well, because they are not. And again, most of them, I think, are innocent in the sense that they don't actually realize how ridiculous the position is.
Is there enough common ground with John Mackey to do something with him? I mean, he does have a huge following.
Sure, but what would we do?
I don't know. I mean, he wants to fight he wants to make the moral case for capitalism.
He doesn't want us to make the moral case for capitalism. He wants to make the moral case for capitalism.
But doesn't he? But I mean, you've pointed out you've been trying to point out the contradictions in the debates, and
he doesn't want to see it. He's chosen not to see it. He constantly equivocates. He's chosen not to see the contradictions. I'm happy to work with him, but on what? There has to be something to do, right? Everybody says to me all the time, why doesn't Ayn work with Cato? And my answer is, on what? What would we, literally, what's the program on which we would work with Cato? They do their thing, we do our thing. We're not, some things there's overlap, but what would we do together? Intellectual work is not done together. It's just done. And that's what needs to be done. We need to get all of our ideas out there. And if Mackey can get good ideas out there, unfortunately, it's tainted with some bad ones. Cato can get good ideas out there, unfortunately, tainted with some bad ones. Everybody needs to just get their ideas out there. And if enough good ideas get out there, we'll win. But it's not about working together. It's not that we should work against each other, but what's the work together?
Well, it's just trying to create critical mass. Like I was looking at the subscriptions.
Like how? How would you do that?
You got to get creative somehow. There's a contradiction.
He's not going to invite me to talk at his things because he disagrees with me. So I can do debates with him, and that allows me to introduce stuff to people who usually are his fans. Okay. But what beyond that? What can we do? We're not going to write op-eds together because we disagree.
Well, on moral grounds, you do. So, and that's the foundations of everything. So,
yeah. So
it's hard to put the square in the circle.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And it's not clear what working together means. It sounds good, but it's not actually clear what it means practically. Because I was always open to working with certain libertarian groups, and I can never figure out, okay, exactly what are we going to do that is productive, that is not just spinning wheels and talking to each other. Anyway. Daniel.
So I find it's very interesting. I guess my general question is, where is the benevolence gone? But I find it very interesting that certainly in Chicago, you walk down the street and make some comment to someone that's passing the other way, and they either look terrified or they try to pretend they didn't see you and keep their eyes ahead as they walk by, especially younger kids. In contrast, much smaller town, tiny little town in Wyoming, everyone says hello. Probably a lot of them even recognize you, but a very different thing. And I'm surprised.
Well, it's altruism and the mixed economy. Everybody is a threat because everybody's taking stuff from you or telling you what to do. Or, is he one of those masked Nazis, they call them, right? And then, on the flip side, are you on principle unvaccinated and therefore going to, potentially give you COVID? It's everything is are you a moocher, looter, or producer? Everybody's a part of that, and it's gotten to the point where because the mixed economy generates this, the welfare state generates this. The people who receive welfare have low self-esteem because they receive welfare, and they feel embarrassed by the fact that they receive the welfare to some extent. They don't want to look you in the eye because they get it. You don't want to look them in the eye because you're the one who's being exploited to give it to them. It's everything, you know. And in a small place, you at least know who's who and what's what. In a big place, you don't. So it creates mistrust and general malevolence.
It's amazing to me because I'm really excited not to be locked down. You know, I'm walking around. Yeah, I've got my mask on so the mask Nazis don't attack.
The real question is, why are you in Chicago?
The work's here.
I know, but it's, you know, it's Chicago. You know, the violence is going through the roof. The mayor is unbelievable. How much of a racist she is.
Yeah. And they're spending all this money. They have to raise taxes. There's no question about it.
It's unbelievable. I mean, the city's been bankrupt for a decade, and it's and yet, you know, they behave as if everything's fine. The pensions, they're bankrupt. Everything's bankrupt. You know, Illinois generally is bankrupt. So,
you know,
I mean, Biden is going to try to bail them out. So.
I'm sure they're still building this beautiful building right across the river from me.
I always am surprised in Chicago, and it's like, why are they building? Who exactly is moving in? But people are moving in because it's still a great city from a business perspective.
You know, and because I live in the neighborhood, I get all the documents. Yeah. They started the permits for this building 20 years ago, actually 21 years ago. It was a much, you know, it's passed through several hands and whatnot. This is global Salesforce. And, you know, now that they've started it pre-pandemic, obviously they're not going to stop, but how many people are actually going to be working in that building? No clue whatsoever.
Chicago is a crazy city because it's such an amazing city. The architecture is amazing. The potential is amazing. I mean, I mean, there was a period there Chicago grew substantially and was modernized and beautiful parks, and yet it's also just this. It has become just this shadow of itself.
Yeah, you know, and I mean, if you look at the statistics, largely it's 15 to 30-year-old male on male, gang member on gang member violence. It does spill over to the other areas. Certain areas the police keep statistics on. Back in the 60s, there were like 100,000 people in this little, they call them wards. Today, there are less than 10,000 people in that same ward.
Yep.
You know, yeah, so some severe problems, no doubt. And
yeah, and it's a city with extreme poverty. I mean, if you go down to the south and certain parts of the west, it's really bad in Chicago, and it's sad because it's an amazing city. Very productive, you know, it was the industrial hub of the Midwest. Okay. All right, Debbie, and a finance, of course.
I have a question about Noam Chomsky. I've heard you refer to him as one of the most evil intellectuals, and I don't know much about him. I've heard his name, but what is it that he stands for, and what is it that makes him so evil?
He's a communist anarchist. Yeah.
Is that even possible?
Yeah. Well, he's a communist anarchist. He hates the United States of America. Actually, that's what attracts many libertarians to him. Some libertarians like him because he so hates America. And he hates Israel. He hates generally the West. He's viciously anti-capitalist. And he was a supporter of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia for many years. And even after all the horrors came out, he refused to repudiate them because he's an egalitarian. He believes in real egalitarianism, inequality.
Wow. So he's actually publicly endorsed the
I mean, a
commemoration
long
after.
time ago, right? He doesn't talk about it anymore. And now he repudiates them, or at least claims to repudiate them. But it took him a long time. And he still supports the goals if he rejects some of their means. But what does that even mean? Yeah, he's really bad.
Yeah.
Communist anarchists, isn't that a contradiction? No, not at all. Not if you understand anarchy to just mean the rule of force, which is what anarchy is.
Ruled by the people, which is what communist claims is.
Yeah,
No,
it's
not
it's
really.
no
But
hierarchy. It's force out there. So if you create your commune and you enforce the rules by communal decree, then it's fine. All right, Action Jackson is in the house. You got a question, Christian?
Hey, yes, I do. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you could meet with one billionaire, which billionaire would you pick and what would you tell them?
Right now?
Yeah, or any time that you would like to meet with them, yes.
I mean, billionaires today, not billionaires in history.
You can pick any throughout history. We can go that route, or you can pick a current one if you want.
Well, I think if it was a current one, I would probably pick Jeff Bezos. He's clearly the most, I think, admirable, interesting, consistent of all of them. What would I tell him? Not to feel guilty. What would I tell him? Go to Mars, baby. I'd say thank you. He's definitely changed my life. I think Musk is too all over the place. I don't think he's got a brilliant mind, but not an organized mind. I don't think you get to Musk. I don't think there'd be a conversation to be had with Musk. I'm trying to think of others. I think it's too late for Bill Gates. I wish I could have met Steve Jobs. That's the guy I would have wanted to meet, and just said thank you and asked him about his experiences with Atlas Shrugged.
Warren Buffett.
I don't know if I'd want to meet Warren Buffett today. Too corrupt. Maybe when he was young. Maybe that would have been really interesting.
Ken Griffin.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to meet Ken Griffin. I'm not sure he's the top one, but for many reasons, I'd love to meet Ken Griffin. Any one of the hedge fund billionaires. But I think of the ones I admire the most, it would be Jeff Bezos. Yeah. Somebody says Trump. I don't think he qualifies because I doubt he's a billionaire. Certainly, I doubt he's a billionaire after IRS gets done with him.
And he's an idiot.
That on top of all of it. One of the reasons I don't think he's a billionaire. Yeah, I think it would have to be Jeff Bezos. All right, let's see. Stephen asked, hi, sorry if this question has been asked before, I came in midstream. In terms of geographic territory, what is the ideal size of states? I don't think there is an ideal size of a state. I don't know if you mean a state as a country or state as a state within a country, but there's no ideal. I think a country should be relatively big. I'd probably err on the side of size because I think there's massive advantages to having uniform laws over a large geographic area with large numbers of people in them. But you want enough of them so that you can emigrate and you can escape bad ones. But I don't think there's an ideal size. Shazbat says, according to Christians, is a miscarriage and abortion by God? I guess. Why is that okay, but a medical abortion is not? Anything God does is okay, including tell you to kill your son. That's okay. Or to kill whole peoples, or to sacrifice anything or anybody. God is morality. God can't do something that's immoral. So if God chose it, it's the right thing. It's the just thing. It's the moral thing. Daria says, should I kill myself? I feel as though I fail in many endeavors in life. The older I get, the more the regrets weigh on me. My learned helplessness has grown to where I barely want to try anymore. No, I don't think you should kill yourself. But of course, at the end of the day, that's a choice you have to make. I would seek help, right? So I definitely think that we need help. We live in a society that's screwed up. We grow up in an environment that's screwed up. There is enormous value to be attained by good psychologists who can help you unwind that learned helplessness, can help you discover why you failed at what you failed. Failure is not necessary. Happiness is achievable, but sometimes you need external help to achieve it. And to bash yourself for not achieving it, for blame yourself for everything, and then try to resolve it by yourself, is just too difficult. And it's sad in a sense that the field of psychology is not better developed, but find a good, Gina Golan, or get a referral from her, but find somebody who can use the right kind of psychology to help you figure out why you fail and why you feel so helpless, and to find the things that bring you joy in life. And that's the focus you should have, even before you find a psychologist, but you should make that a priority. The focus you should have is on the things that bring you joy. Forget the stuff you failed at. It's gone. It's in the past. It doesn't matter anymore. The only thing that matters is the present and the future. The past is irrelevant. Regrets are useless. Literally useless. And to a large extent, if they're done badly, they handcuff you and they make it difficult for the future. So, put a heavy emphasis on now and the future, and try to start life fresh. In a sense, you should start every day fresh. Hopefully you've learned something from your past, but you shouldn't let the past bog you down. Now, again, I'm not a psychologist, so it's easy for me to say. Implementing it and making it a habit is what a psychologist would help you do. But I would encourage you to seek help and to try to find all the things that you find joy in and immerse yourself in those, and try to separate yourself from the past. Stefan says, I already killed him. Why is that? God, I have some very negative listeners. Find joy, find something positive, find the things that make you feel good about yourself and about life, and focus on those. Are you familiar with Rich Dad, Poor Dad? My bro recommended I read it, and I'm surprised how nearly objectivist it is. What book should I recommend back to him if I think he is sympathetic to objectivism? Well, Fountainhead or Atlas Shrugged. That's what you should recommend to. Yeah, I think Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I haven't read it, but I've heard a lot of good things about it. So it's great that you found it so useful. But if you think he's ready for objectivism, give him Objectivism, which is Ayn Rand. All right. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate all the questions. I appreciate the support. Thanks, you guys on the panel. And I will see you all probably on Saturday, maybe tomorrow, we'll see. And certainly on Sunday. All right. Bye, everybody. Thanks.